This is the Can Crushers Wrestling Podcast.
The following contest is scheduled for one fall.
Let's go nuts! It's Jimmy Nuts! Drive out with a car!
With your hosts, Mark Martinez.
Remember, just because you're trash doesn't mean you can't do great things.
And the English Professor.
It's called a garbage can, not a garbage cannot.
Hey, this is former WWE superstar Duke, the Dumpster Drosy, and you are listening to the Can Crushers Podcast.
Greetings and salutations, Can Crusher Nation. I am your host, Mark Martinez. Welcome back to the show if you've been along for this ride for a long time. And if you're new to the show, I hope you subscribe. I hope you like us. I hope you tell a friend that Can Crushers is where it's at. Go back and listen to all our episodes on Spotify, iTunes. We have our website that's tagged everywhere in the world. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All of it's at CanCrusher69. If you want to ask us some questions, CanCrusher69@gmail.com. There, the generic stuff for the week is out of the way. This spotlight is going to be unbelievable. But let's stop for a minute and let's reminisce about going to a newsstand or a bookstore, and you always run as mom or dad are looking at other books, and bam, you're a little kid, you go to the comic book section. You're either looking at Batman or Wonder Woman or, I don't know comics as good as you do. So I'm not going to lie and just say other people because, I didn't read those type of comics. I was into the wrestling comics. You would go and grab one, and then for like 2-3 months it would run, and it's awesome. But as soon as it gets to like a mega fight or something, it was either canceled or you didn't know about it or what the hell happened. Well, let me tell you right now who is on Can Crusher Spotlight this week. We have the writer and editor of Comic Book Encyclopedia of Pro Wrestling, John Crowther and Kevin LaPorte. Both of them have their hands all over this, guys. They really do. You know that I kind of record the interview prior, and I'm going to leak a little bit of stuff, but there's a huge announcement coming up that I am not going to leak. There's a huge announcement coming up that involves Can Crushers, and this is unbelievable. It might be game-changing. It really might be game-changing. These two guys, Kevin and John, have worked with the Killer Bees. So have we. They have worked with Nikolai Volkov, Bruno Sammartino. You guys, listen, I don't want to ruin everything that these guys are going to talk about. But I will tell you, if you want to get this book, you need to go to WrestlingComics.com. You'll see some amazing artwork. You get all the books there. You can pre-order it right now. We'll hear more from John and Kevin about when it's coming out in the interview. So let's just do our thing that we normally do and bring Al Snow in so he can tell you about Collar and Elbow. Guys, you know I love the Collar and Elbow brand. Hats, hoodies, tees, all the designs are amazing. They're old school, and there's some new school with Al Snow and Head in the Macho Man logo. Still my favorite. Nobody's ever going to change it. That's my favorite. It's purple. I also look good in purple. Guys, we have our Can Crushers promo code that will get you 10% off your entire order. It's Can Crushers, all one word. Capital C in Can, capital C in Crushers. Here comes Al, and then right around the corner, we're going to be talking about the Comic Book Encyclopedia of Pro Wrestling with John Crowther and Kevin LaPorte. Oh, I'm so damn excited.
Wrestling. A love and a passion we all share. I've started a wrestling brand. The wrestling brand. A brand founded on the aspects of wrestling. Two entities working together to create a product that connect emotionally for people everywhere. Collar and Elbow is the brand. Passion and love for wrestling is the drive. I am Al Snow, and this is Collar and Elbow, the wrestling brand.
and welcome back to Can Crushers. Guys, I told you this was going to be an amazing episode, and we're just going to jump right into the questions, and we're going to meet the guys from the comic book Encyclopedia of Pro Wrestling. Joining me now is Kevin LaPorte and John Crowther. Guys, how are you doing?
Doing awesome, Mark. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for having us on.
So let's get to know you guys before we really talk what we're going to talk about today in this Pro Wrestling Encyclopedia, because it's incredible, but we got lots of time. Let's talk wrestling first, because that's what it's all about. How did you guys get involved in wrestling? I mean, from the way back, so little Johnny and the little Kevin, we all have great wrestling stories of Dad or Grandpa telling us about this.
Go ahead, John. I'll follow up.
Well, I'm a lifelong fan of pro wrestling. I remember being a little kid, growing up. I'm from Florida. I'm from Central Florida, and I remember going over to my great grandfather's house. Like you said, we've all got that dad or the grandfather story, but it was my great grandfather who was a huge fan of wrestling, and so I would go over and watch that championship wrestling from Florida on the old black and white, and of course, my grandfather, great grandfather Edge, He thought that stuff was as real as could be. So he would be up screaming at the TV, throwing punches in the air. He was a big fan of Wahoo McDaniel, So being a kid and seeing that, you kind of get energized. And, I was energized by it. I loved it. And then as luck would have it, growing up in Florida, that was the territorial days. Yeah. And Florida was really one of the hot territories back in the 70s when I was a kid and on into the 80s. And, I was lucky because there were a lot of wrestlers in the Florida area. And I want to say I was probably about 10, maybe 11 years old. And you remember Kevin Sullivan?
I do. I just met him last year.
Okay, a great guy. And Kevin Sullivan had I think it was pre-Army of Darkness, but it was kind of around that time. And my father, of all things, happened to be his lawyer. And I remember being at my dad's law office one day, and this was at the time when Kevin Sullivan was throwing those fireballs. I don't know if you remember that. Yep. And, yeah, he had Woman was his valet. I think he was with Oliver Humperdinck, and Mark Lewin, I think, was maybe there with him. But anyway, he shows up at the office and he walks in, and I'm like, holy shit, that's the devil. So I see him come walking in, and I chase behind him, and the way the office is built, it's in an old house. So he goes in, and there's this little peek hole window that overlooked where he was with my dad. So I climb up on a chair, and I'm this little kid peeking through the window. My mom's like, John, you can't do that. Dad's in there with a client. I'm like, Mom, you don't understand. That's the devil. And so my mom, knew I loved wrestling. I mean, every morning I was up watching it, and so she didn't want to ruin the magic of it. So she's like, well, son, I'm sure he's not going to throw a fireball at your father. I think everything's going to be okay. So I was a huge fan of it ever since I was little. I did, like you said, you met Kevin, I guess last year. Yeah. I was lucky enough to see him again. I mean, I would run into him a few times. I'd run into it like Steak and Shake. I remember these guys calling me over as a little kid at it was called a Sapporo Steakhouse in Daytona Beach, and they had me come over and have sushi with them. I mean, they were really cool guys. And I thought it was cool because here I was, fans with the bad guys, or friends with bad guys. But several years later, I want to say it was WrestleMania in Orlando, Kevin Sullivan was there at WrestleCon. And I walked over and talked to him for a bit. He actually remembered the story, and we had a nice chat. And then I saw him again at Legends Luncheon in Tampa, probably last year. And we kind of become, at least conversational friends, and it was pretty cool. But a fan ever since then.
In the devil. So you're definitely a heel, as I do my air quotes. You love the heels.
I was a fan of the heels from day one. Him, Blackjack Mulligan was a big one of the big guys I always loved. Cowboy Ron Bass, of course, Outlaw Ron Bass. He went by sometime. Another great guy. I had lucky enough. First time I ever reached out to him. I was older. I was in my early 40s, and he says, "Meet me at McDonald's." I'm like, are you kidding me? So I get in my truck, I drive over to McDonald's, and I end up sitting and having coffee with Ron Bass at McDonald's for 4 hours. just talking stories. I mean, it was so freaking cool, and I loved it, and that's the cool thing about what I'm doing now is I've had an opportunity to, these men and women also that I admired as a kid and watched them and really, dreamed about meeting them at one point and not really ever having much of an opportunity to do that. But now, to be able to call them friends and to get together with them and to just do friend things. I mean, I'll be getting together with a bunch of them this Friday. I'll be back down at the Legends Luncheon where I always see Ming and Brian Blair and a lot of those guys, and it's just a really cool thing.
Nice. How about you, Kevin?
I'm from the Mobile, Alabama area, so we had a Southeastern Championship Wrestling from the late 70s to the mid 80s, and so Bullet Bob Armstrong was really big here. The Tennessee stud Robert Fuller. Then we had Austin Idol did a long run here. He was my mom's favorite. My grandfather was definitely a part of my introduction to wrestling, but my mom primarily. She is a huge wrestling fan to this very day. She's very proud of what we're doing. I have to give her a copy of every book, and she just grins ear to ear. She can't believe that we're actually doing this, that I've met a lot of these guys that John has introduced me to. But yeah, back then we went to matches at Mobile Expo Hall. Every once in a while I saw Ric Flair versus Austin Idol, the Battle of the Figure Fours back in 81 or 82. So yeah, my wrestling heritage runs deep for many years. We had Adrian Street down here for a while.
Jealous of that one.
Yeah, he was amazing. So yeah, lifelong wrestling fan as well.
So John, you brought up B. Brian Blair. We had him on the show probably last year, and I'll ask you off the cuff question. Are you guys part of Collar and Elbow? Not Collar and Elbow. Of course you're part of Collar and Elbow. That's our sponsor. No, are you part of the Cauliflower Alley Club with Brian Blair? Works wonders with all these old school wrestlers.
Yeah, in fact, this will be a surprise to Kevin as well. I'm actually a lifelong or a lifetime member, and probably about a month ago I bought Squared Circle lifetime membership. They just haven't announced it yet.
Oh, congratulations.
Okay.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, I do the luncheons as often as I can. I was in Tampa until last year, so I was able to do them. They do them. I want to say it's like once every 4 months. So I was able to go a lot more often when I was down in Tampa. But now I'm up, closer to Daytona Beach, so it's not as easy. Plus, with the COVID-19 stuff going, it's kind of slowed a lot of stuff down. But it's nice that they've got one going again this Friday. And it's for anyone who's been, you can attest to how great it is. But if you haven't, it's really a fun thing. I mean, it's just basically it's a luncheon. It's like a bunch of guys get together at a sports bar, and we eat burgers and we drink beer, and it's fans and it's wrestlers, and we just talk wrestling, and it's just really cool. And then once a year out in Vegas, I don't know if you've ever been to that, the big CAC event in Vegas, which is always really good, and they give out a lot of awards to the wrestlers and such. I haven't made it out there yet. I've been meaning to. They've invited me to the last two, but it's not always. It's not always that easy to take a week off and fly out to Vegas and shut down work and do all of that. But one of these days also.
We were actually looking at Vegas this year before quarantine hit, and then, my wife put a stop to me to going to, which everything has been canceled. We were going to go to the Crockett Cup. We weren't allowed going to that. We were going to go to this. We were going to go to that. And once quarantine hit, she's like, you're canceling everything if wrestling doesn't cancel anyway. Happy wife, happy life, right, guys?
Correct.
So, all right, let's get into this. Some are calling it a book, some are calling it an encyclopedia, some are calling it comic. Let's find out what you guys are legit calling this. And I'm going to ask you the question right off the bat. Is it volume 1 of many more to come?
It is. It's a collection of our first 10 books that we published for the Squared Circle Comics brand, and it's all of the above. It's a book, it's a comic, it's an encyclopedia. It combines all those elements. We were looking at a way to package all these amazing stories that John wrote, that these incredible artists illustrated, into something. We wanted something extra, and John had the terrific idea of making it an encyclopedia. And the more we talked about that concept, the more it occurred to me that we had so many references in these stories, these rich, background-heavy stories from the wrestlers' own mouths, that we should have references to in the encyclopedia entries to explain some of who these other people were, their backgrounds, their history. That's not explained in the books. That's more personal to the wrestlers that the book's named for.
What we did, just so people understand, because you hear the word encyclopedia, I think Kevin said correctly, it's really a combination of all three. What I tried to do initially when we were doing these stories and how it all evolved originally was I had become friends with Nikolai Volkov. We had a mutual friend, and one of the things I learned through Nikolai is you don't think about it. I mean, if you're a fan of wrestling, or say you're a fan of baseball, or you're a fan of whatever, generally speaking, you see these athletes, and you kind of think of them only in that little bubble. You think Nikolai Volkov, he's a wrestler, but you're not thinking about what Nikolai Volkov, the man, is really all about. So we started chatting, and it turned out we had something in common. He loved comics, and he had read one of my comics that I had done before with Antarctic Press about, of all things, a teenage cockroach. And he liked it, and we got to talking, and he said, hey, I've had people approach me over the years about doing a book about my life in comic form, but every time we start talking about it, they say they're going to do it, and then they just disappear off the face of the earth. And I said, well, Nicola, I'll tell you right now, if I promise you I'll do something, I'll get it done. So what it was just basically sitting down with him and going over his career, but not just his career, also what got him into professional wrestling, what he was like as a kid, what he was like growing up, and it's basically who he was as a person. And that's how we started doing it. So that's the neat thing about these stories is the stories aren't just about wrestling. The stories are about these men and these women and what their lives were like, how they got into the business. Because, I found that a lot of I was a history major, and I've always been a fan of history. And you start learning that, particularly at least to me, with a lot of the older guys and gals that were wrestling, had some really interesting stories. I mean, you had Nikolai Volkov was a 17-year-old kid that defected from Yugoslavia. I mean, and came to not to the U.S., but actually to Canada to train with Stu Hart. But, I mean, could you imagine at 17 years old walking out of your country and moving to a whole new country, whole new language, and becoming a pro wrestler? I mean, it's unheard of. I mean, most kids are still in high school, or you had a Bruno Sammartino. Nikolai introduced me to Bruno. And here Bruno was a kid living in the hiding. I shouldn't even say living, hiding in the Italian Alps with his mother from the Nazis. And here it was a guy that held the WWF title for 11 years and held the world record in the bench press. But he couldn't even get into the U.S. because he was so unhealthy when he was a child. It took him three years to pass the physical to get to this country. So there were so many really cool stories about these guys that came even before they ever got into the wrestling ring. And those are the things we wanted to tell.
Yeah, that kind of piggybacks. I'm going to give myself a spot real quick. That's what we do with our spotlights. I mean, we talk to the wrestlers. We get to know about a match here or a match here, but we want to know them personally. So we're kind of working hand in hand a little bit, and we didn't know about it for the longest time. I want to know who, Johnny Blaze is or Justin Smooth before he becomes Justin Smooth. So that's what's the interesting part of wrestling. It's human interaction.
Absolutely. And then the cool part about the matches when we get into the wrestling is I've tried to stay, when I write, I've tried to stay true to the magic of wrestling. I mean, I think one of the biggest compliments I ever received was that someone read one of the comics and they said, I can tell this comic is written by a wrestling fan. And that's one of the biggest compliments I ever got because I love wrestling. I've always loved wrestling, and I want to keep that in the book. So I try not to take away from the magic of wrestling when I get to the matches. I mean, I tell the matches as though I stay kayfabe. And then you'll also see, which is actually pretty cool, that we all have our own ideas of what their greatest match was or their greatest opponent. Okay, but with this, I don't care what my greatest match for them was or who I thought their greatest opponent. I asked them. And we try and put those in there. So these are the key matches and opponents and things that happen in their lives to them. Not necessarily the stuff that was featured on TV even, or the stuff that was featured in the magazine, but the stuff that's in their mind is the peaks of their career.
So how did you go about picking this roster, so to speak, for volume number 1?
Well, and I can let's let Kevin kind of explain that.
Well, it's basically the first 10 books that we did. And so those came along as the opportunity to meet the wrestlers, and John does 99% of our recruiting and face-to-face with the wrestlers to get them in to agree to do the interviews, to do the books. And so it's basically a process of making contacts to meet the wrestlers, and then their own time frames in terms of being able to agree to a contract and to make time for the interview. And then we, of course, have a publishing schedule that we have to do. So it's basically a factor, the major factor is scheduling and opportunity.
Yeah, and on my end, like I said, initially I met Nikolai, and I was blessed because Nikolai is a wonderful person who is extremely highly respected in the industry. Everybody respected Nikolai. Anybody I'd talk to, they'd say, "Oh, wow, yeah, Nikolai is a real stand-up guy, great guy." And I learned, to me, I don't know if either of you were ever in a fraternity in college.
Yeah.
But I liken it to the wrestling business, at least as an outsider viewing it, as I was getting to know these guys. It was kind of like a fraternity, and once you gain the trust of one or the trust of two, and they realize you're not trying to scam them, that you're going to do what you say you're going to do, word started to spread, So I drove over to WrestleMania in Orlando, and that's where Nikolai introduced me to Bruno. I had been chatting on the phone for a little bit with Brian Blair, who, as you mentioned yourself, is the president of the Cauliflower Alley Club. So we worked out an agreement with Brian, and then from there it just kind of actually word of mouth spread like wildfire. And I was introduced to Jake Hager, who was also at that WrestleMania. Lanny Poffo, obviously Jim Brunzell was there with Brian because we wanted to feature the Killer Bees. But then some of the other guys we've worked with, like the Rock and Roll Express, Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson. Hacksaw Jim Duggan actually was introduced to me by Kevin. They had done a show together, a comic book convention up in Alabama, I believe, if I'm correct. And then some of the ones that are coming up here in the future, Rocky Johnson. I was, again, another blessing that I'm here in Florida because I was doing those. This is actually a pretty funny story. I do these luncheons, and I come walking in, and I'm actually with Brian Blair and Bugsy McGraw. And was talking, and Bugsy's a good friend. He just lives about 20 minutes from me. But I'm sitting there talking to Brian and Bugsy and Ming, actually. And I hear a voice across the room. Hey. I'm like, what the hell, I turn around, and I'm like, holy shit, that's Rocky Johnson, I mean, I'd seen him when I came in, but, I've seen these guys on TV, so I'm still a little standoffish at first until, someone breaks the ice. But I see him over there. I'm like, me? And he's like, yeah, you the comic book guy? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, get over here. So I walk over, and I'm talking to him, and he says, how come you haven't done my comic yet? Am I not famous enough for you?
Wow.
And I'm like, of course you're famous enough. I said, you haven't asked. He's like, well, I'm asking now. Here's my card. Give me a call. So, these guys, like I said, word had spread. He knew of me as the comic book guy, And so it's, and it became, it was great working with Rocky. And, that's probably the hardest part of what I've done so far is that three of these guys, because you become close when you're talking to people over and over and getting their stories and hearing the ins and outs and telling jokes and getting together. Nikolai flew down a couple times and stayed with me, and Rocky just lived not that far. And I think for 2 years, any convention he did, I was sitting there with him. So we did all these conventions together, and then they die. And that's been kind of tough, because I lost Nikolai, I lost Bruno, I lost Rocky. That's been the hardest part. And if anything's dissuaded me from doing something, it's been that, just because it's not fun to lose friends. But, but because of working with them and gaining these relationships, I've signed so many new guys, or we've signed so many new guys. We've got Terry Funk coming up in the future for a book. We've got Magnum TA, which is such an honor because when I talked to Magnum and he agreed to work with us, he said we're the first book. He's turned them down, but we're the first book he's done in any form since his horrible accident that left him paralyzed for a while. We've got guys from the AEW. We got Billy Gunn that we're with. There's it's just a blessing. It really is, and I'm numb all the time, just thinking it's hard to believe that we're actually doing this stuff.
So you brought up the AEW. I'll ask you both this kind of off the book for a minute. How much wrestling do you guys watch now? Are you watching? Are you engulfed in it? I know you guys, and we'll get to how long this process has taken. But do you guys have time to watch wrestling right now?
I think I've watched less since the virus hit and there aren't audiences. It's changed the flavor of it for me. We were watching a lot more last year. My kid and I love The Fiend, love Bray Wyatt, and that whole gimmick that was going on. That was a blast. I did see the development this week when he kind of went back to his old persona. That was fun to see. But once the virus hit, there's just a lot more going on, and the audience disappeared. It got kind of awkward to watch, and so maybe I'm missing out on something there. But we've definitely watched less recently, and plus working on that encyclopedia took a lot of my time to put that book together on the technical side and just get it ready for print. So I've been pretty preoccupied. One thing I do miss is NWA Powerrr. We were loving that show. Love that show.
Yes.
And we have really missed being able to watch. It reminded me so much of wrestling as a kid. The Southeastern Championships type studio vibe. And we enjoyed the hell out of that.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I think my watching wrestling had really petered off anyway. I'm a big fan of old school wrestling. Just before we went live, I kind of mentioned to you that I was a little delayed in logging in because I was sitting there reading the autobiography of Terry Funk. I mean, I just love that old school stuff, and it's kind of gotten away from that. It's kind of gotten away. Back then it was a little bit more technical, a little bit more realistic, not so many high flying spots and stuff like that. Which, some people like it. I'm not going to take away from what people like. It's just probably not something that I'm as big on. I did love NWA Powerrr, like Kevin was saying. That's if there was any program that I watched, every single week, it was NWA Powerrr. I've also got, because of the way the internet is, and I want to say it's on Prime. I was watching a lot of old Memphis wrestling. They've actually got a Memphis wrestling, some old shows on there. And I watched a lot of that stuff. So maybe not so much a lot of the new things. I mean, it was interesting seeing AEW come on, but in the town I live in, to be perfectly honest, we don't get it. I don't even know what network it's on. So that's part of the problem too. I mean, I could, if you kick Fox on, I could, or not Fox, or yeah, I guess it's Fox. I could watch WWE, but AEW, it's just not. There's no network channel here. It's kind of like you got to go to YouTube and track their stuff down. So it kind of makes stuff. Plus, you're busy. I mean, I got all the comics I'm doing. Something I'll plug that I've been working on here now for about the last 3-4 weeks is it's a full-length autobiography for the Bushwhackers. Yes. So, yeah, a lot of that is, every Wednesday night, generally for about 2 hours, I'm Skyping with Butch, who's in New Zealand, and Luke, who's in Clearwater, which we've had to learn how to work with that because Butch actually is 16 hours ahead of us. So we had to time it so that it's 8 o'clock at night for us, but it's noon for him the next day. So we're I'm doing that 2 hours every Wednesday night, and then a lot of, once you talk to them, breaking it all down in note form, researching what they're saying, because I mean, at least in this stage of it, we're talking about the 60s,
Right.
So we're going back a lot of years and trying to remember stuff that they did, and then having to double check to make sure dates and names and stuff like that are correct. It takes a lot of time. It's fun, and I'm learning a lot more and reiterating stories and remembering things and stuff like that, but it takes a lot of that TV viewing time.
Great transition into the next question. It's like you're reading my notes. How long has this process been on the Encyclopedia now? I mean, it just didn't come out 2 weeks ago when we connected. How long has this process been?
We started production on the first Nikolai book in 2016, about August of 2016, I think, John?
Yeah,
and,
on my end, actually.
Yeah.
I made contact with Nikolai in 2014.
Wow.
And so if you really want to trace it back to its roots, it was around end of 2014, beginning of 2015. I started talking to Nikolai about getting something done. And what I had done is I've only been into comics, which has been a pretty quick growth for me, too. I really got into comics towards the end of 2014. And I was trying to find connections through Kickstarter, actually, with people who I saw as, what I wanted, people I'd want to work with, people who put out a good product, who followed up on and completed projects, who shot straight from the hip. I'm always been a straight shooter, and who got things done. And that's how I came across Kevin and Amanda. Actually, I backed a couple of their projects, and everything they said they were going to do, they did and more. It was just really impressive. Got things done, and we struck up a friendship. That's when I approached them about, bringing Nikolai over and asked if that was something they'd want to do. Not even knowing they were wrestling fans. To be perfectly honest, I found that out later. But that's just how it is. I mean, it's kind of like that with comics. It's like that with wrestling. I remember, when I went to school, I was never the guy that was talking about I read comics or I watched wrestling. I was doing other kind of stuff. I just you kind of kept that back. It was more taboo. That stuff has come more. It's now cool to admit you do geeky things now. But back then, you wanted to hide that stuff, and you wanted to put on this persona that you only did cool stuff. So I kind of found out as I started getting into this, all these people coming out of the woodwork that I had hung out with and was friends with back in school, they're like, oh, shit, we never knew you dug wrestling, or we never knew you read comics or anything like that. That's now everybody says they do. But, so it's not the thing I would necessarily approach people on when I meet them, like, hey, are you a wrestler? It just kind of grew. So it was a perfect fit.
So why a comic book? You might have kind of briefed over this. Why a comic book instead of just a normal, shoot book, as we would call it?
Well, Kevin, you want to answer that, or?
Well, just speaking from a publisher perspective, and I do write a line of comics too, just not the wrestling bios, but we're able to present, and John always brings this up when he talks about the wrestlers. They're superheroes in their own right. They're larger than life characters. The costumes, the names, the personas, the rivalries, the feuds, all of it. You can parallel it to any comic book hero and villain. Superman and Lex Luthor, Batman and the Joker, Spider-Man and the Green Goblin. You can go right down the line and you can draw parallels between comic books and wrestling. So it's a natural fit. I think our approach is to tell the positive side of wrestling, keep it fun. That's something we can do easily in comics. We can easily portray the wrestling side of it, the actual action. We've got amazing artists that are experienced, artists that work for Marvel and DC that are experienced in portraying that action, but also experienced in portraying the human side of those wrestlers. Just like the things that they have to overcome, just like the Marvel comics that are more realistic in terms of portraying challenges in life and so forth. So I think it's a natural fit. It's a lot more fun than a prose book to me, just to see it. It also makes it accessible to kids who want to see that visual side of it. And to me, when I read one of our comics, I can hear the crowds. I see those pictures. I can hear the crowds going crazy at the spots that John writes into the script and the artists portray. So I think it's a really natural fit, and it's worked out really well. It's gotten a lot of traction and a lot of attention.
Yeah, and I'll agree with Kevin. I mean, that's actually how I promoted the book to Nikolai in the first place. I mean, I said, to me, you guys are, walking comic book superheroes. That's really what you are. I mean, wrestlers are, for most people, when they view them, they're bigger than life. I mean, physically, they jump off of top ropes. They do these amazing feats of strength that normal average human being can't do. And I remember when I first brought it up, and you saw the digital copy of the comic. So Brian Blair's first issue, actually, it opens up with a scene that Brian's a little kid, and he's got a cape tied around his neck, and he climbs up on the back of his couch, and he leaps off and lands in a pile of pillows on the floor. And I remember Brian telling me, which was kind of cool because it's how I've always kind of pitched these books anyway. But he said when he was a little kid, his minister actually asked him one time, he says, what do you want to do when you grow up, or what do you want to be? He says, well, I either want to be a superhero or I want to be a professional wrestler. So he strapped on his cape, he climbed to the top of his couch, he leaped off the couch, and he crashed into the floor. And he said he realized then he couldn't be Superman, but he could still be a professional wrestler. So it really is. It really ties in. I'm always a big fan. I think that I want to introduce a lot of these guys, particularly the older guys that we're working with, to a whole new set of fans. I mean, a lot of these men and women, I mean, they performed back in the 80s, some of them earlier. I mean, like Bruno was obviously back in the 50s, 60s. But, we want to present them to a whole new set of of fans, like younger fans who didn't do it. What's the best way to do it? Then through pictures, nice, pretty pictures of good stories. And I remember when it first dawned on me. Actually, I was doing a comic book convention in Tampa Bay, and I remember seeing all these people, families walking by, and all these kids would stop at my table, and they were picking up my cockroach. And I'd see standing behind them these like 40-year-old men with their arms crossed, watching their kid buy something. And then the kid would say, "Dad, can I have this comic?" He'd pull out his wallet, he'd buy the comic. And I thought to myself, what about Dad? You know, why is Dad's walking around pulling out his wallet, buying everybody's stuff, but what about him? What about the stuff he's a fan? You know, he's the same age as me. So what did guys my age like? I thought they like wrestling. You know, that you might not sell them on a Cockroach Girl comic book, but I bet you I could sell them on a professional wrestling comic. You know, and that's what I wanted to aim for. And that's what I told the guys. I said, you've got these fans out there that are just waiting for a product. All we got to do is make it.
You're exactly right on that, John. There's been one-offs here or there about, you know, Ultimate Warrior, this, that, or the other. I don't want to bring up too many names because I don't know what you have planned, but I would buy it. But then it was never around again. You never knew how it ended or anything. So it was just always dropped because there weren't sales. I mean, I know that's the main thing is sales, and that's why you guys went to Kickstarter to kind of get some help, right?
Right, and we are a niche market. We do know we're a niche market. I mean, we're really have to focus on wrestling fans. I mean, there's going to be some peripheral fans that'll come in and want to pick it up and check it out. But for the most part, yeah, we're focused on wrestling fans because that's who wants to read about wrestlers. It really is.
Do you want to release everybody who's in it that actually have not seen the links or anything yet? You want to tell everybody who's in it, or do you want to wait until the book actually is hard copy? How do you want to take that?
No, we can absolutely talk about who's in the book. These stories have been released in the past, just in different forms. So we're happy to talk about all the guys that are and girls that are in this book.
All right, go ahead. Yeah,
can we run through it?
Yeah, run through it.
Okay, so just in chronological order, we've got Bruno Sammartino, we've got Nikolai Volkov, we've got Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Lanny Poffo, the Genius, brother of the Macho Man. We've got the Killer Bees, Jim Brunzell and Brian Blair. We've got Ricky Morton of the Rock and Roll Express. We've got Jake Hager, or Jack Swagger as he was once known, and Sunny the California Girl from Glow. And I think that's everybody. Did I miss somebody?
We got Bobby Fulton.
And Bobby Fulton of the Fantastics. That's right.
Because actually, I mean, I can't, and people have asked me before, what's my favorite? It's hard to really say, but the cool thing about Bobby Fulton is if you're an NWA fan, Bobby Fulton is a true story of a guy who was a wrestling fan. I should say a kid who was a wrestling fan who just started hanging out at events, talked his way into being allowed to help out around the arena, bringing in bags or sweeping, eventually setting up rings. And at the age of 17, he got his first match. Now, the neat thing about it was they didn't smarten him up before they gave him his first match. So he showed up with his boots, his gear. He would carry this around with him just in case he ever got a chance. And he would ask guys to show him moves and stuff. And he shows up at this event in Chillicothe, Ohio. And the promoter tells him, he says, "How old are you, kid?" He says, "I'm 17. He says, "Well, you're 18 tonight. Get your gear on." So he throws his gear on, and he says, "You got the opening match." So he goes to the match. They send this guy Mad Dog out to the ring to wrestle him. And the trick was they didn't tell Mad Dog it was a work either. So both of these guys get in the ring. Bobby's like 17, Mad Dog's like 22, 23. And literally for about 10 minutes, they just beat the shit out of each other. And eventually, the promoter just opened up the locker room, sent all the wrestlers out to break it all up. Bobby says he got done. They handed him his first, which made him a pro, his first payday of $5. He signed a couple autographs, and he was the happiest guy on the planet because he was a pro wrestler.
Bobby Fulton, one of the greatest, and take a minute now. We all know that he's in remission now with his cancer. He's really kicking its ass, so we're excited about that.
Very much so.
Absolutely. And I actually saw tonight, before we got going on this, there's a push And I recommend anybody who loves Bobby and stuff he did with the Fantastics back in the day. There's actually a push right now on Twitter to get him named the new, I think he'd be the new vice president of NWA Powerrr.
That would be great.
So, it'd be fantastic. So anybody who knows Bobby knows what a great guy is. He runs a nice, great promotion, again, up in Chillicothe called Big Time Wrestling, which if you recognize the name, it's kind of a take on the old name, the Sheik had a Big Time Wrestling up in Detroit, which was Bobby's actual, that's the wrestling he grew up on. He grew up watching the Sheik out of Detroit as a kid. So they've got Big Time Wrestling up in Chillicothe. They bring in a lot of good veterans. He runs a good program. He's there with his son Dylan, who helps him out a lot. And, hey, if you can get on Twitter and push Bobby, that'd be fantastic. We'd love to get a guy in NWA Powerrr.
For sure, to get it back on his feet as well. You also have in this 280-some page book some super fans as well that kind of helped out Kickstarter, right?
Yeah, and the Can Crushers are a part of that super fan page. You got your picture in there. We've got a write-up about you guys, what you've done, your status in the wrestling world, all of your renown. It's right there in the book.
I guess that makes you guys like our ringside commentators. Squared Circle.
There you go.
That's great. If we can keep this up, I would love it. So are you telling me live right now on Can Crushers, we're the only podcast in that book?
You were the only podcast in that book.
I'm going to have to do something. We're going to have to celebrate, or I don't know what, but everybody's going to be excited for this.
Yeah, and I appreciate that support. I saw that come in, and because I was not aware of who all of the backers were initially. Kevin gets all of that info, and it looks great. I mean, there's some, you guys, you look just like the rendition that's in the book. I mean, it's almost like I'm talking to the book right now.
It's amazing. I do want to talk about that, and I actually want to know, my wife wants to make that picture that you guys drew up of us. Can we start making that into shirts? Can we have the rights to that to start selling those or something? Because that's legit yours. So I'd have to ask that.
Oh, yeah, we'll send you that. Send me an email after the podcast, and we'll get you the high-res image for you to use.
Excellent.
And we'd be remiss if we didn't mention, Kevin and I did not draw, render that art. That was actually done by Amanda Rachels, who's one of our very talented artists who's worked with us and works with Kevin. She co-owns Inverse Press, actually, who's the primary publishing company for Squared Circle. And she did our cover, or one of our covers, for Rocky Johnson. Mm-hmm. She also did one of our covers for Sunny, the California Girl, for anybody listening who's a fan of the original Glow Wrestling, not the Netflix stuff, but the original Glow Wrestling. Sunny was the first of the Glow Girls that we're going to be doing stories for. Next one coming up would be Hollywood. For those of you who may know Jeannie Bassone, she's very interactive with fans on Facebook, and she was actually the first lady ever signed by Glow. And we feel very privileged to be able to tell their stories as well.
I was not allowed watching that because I was younger then. I had to go to bed by the time Glow came on, so it took me many years to find it on tape trading or this or that. But the Netflix did good. I liked it a little bit.
Yeah, it's a different format, but it's a fun show, and it does honor the girls. They're not the exact characters, but they're similar renditions that are put out there to kind of represent some of the original characters, and I think they've done a nice job. And I think for the most part, I think most of the original Glow Girls appreciate what they've done, and I know a lot of them have been called on set filming, and I was told that they had a really good time and they treated them really well there. So, I think it's been great. CAC, actually, you mentioned before, Cauliflower Alley Club, even brought all the girls in and honored them recently at one of the big functions out in Vegas. So they're getting a little bit more recognition now for some of the stuff they did. I mean, when you think about it, they kind of were trailblazers for a lot of the ladies that are in pro wrestling now, whether it be in Impact or whether it be in WWE or NWA Powerrr, or AEW. These girls really were kind of the first ones going out there and being like divas on TV, and they owned it. I mean, and great training. If you're a fan of the Guerrero family, Mondo Guerrero trained all those girls, so they had some good training, and they knew what they were doing.
They did. So you brought up the artwork a few times, and let's actually give Amanda some more props, since we could have had her on too. I dropped the ball on that one, guys. So I'm sorry. How long did it take her to draw some of that? And was it kind of her idea? You know, I've seen some of the pictures like of the Macho Man and this and that. Was it you gave her an idea and she ran with it?
It's a little bit of both. Amanda and I work together on most of the production for our comics on both the wrestling side and on the more horror side that we do in our own comics. So when we develop a concept, I'm throwing out ideas, she's throwing out ideas. It's a brainstorming session, and then visually, she's the one that gets it down. But as far as the wrestling superfan pictures that you guys are a part of, I gave her a general idea of how we wanted it. I did the write-up and gave it to her, and then she based the art off of the write-up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Because like we had a buddy, our buddy Kareem Fernandez, who's also a big wrestling fan out of Panama City. He wanted his whole family in the picture, and he wanted him as Captain Lou Albano. He wanted his son as Bret the Hitman Hart. So, you know, and so on and so on. His wife is Miss Elizabeth, and his other son is Doink, the clown. So the entire family is made up to look like these wrestlers, but they're still recognizable as themselves. So it was a lot of fun. As far as the art for the encyclopedia entries, Amanda did quite a bit of those, and those were just her own design. She took and made an interpretation of those wrestlers that was totally hers based on her knowledge and her research of the wrestler.
So you guys have a lot more coming up. You really do. But let's talk about everything you did in the past. Where can we find some of the older stuff that you have? I mean, this is your time to gloat now. Just sell everything that you want.
Okay. All of our books can be found at WrestlingComics.com. That's the easiest way to find our books. That's our home on the web, WrestlingComics.com. You can find, we're still taking pre-orders for the Encyclopedia there. It's been with the printer for about a week and a half now, so we anticipate having it in hand in the next couple of weeks. So we can still take pre-orders up until that date. But also any of the single issues that we have in stock, we have the Nikolai graphic novel in stock at that site. So any of those books can be gotten right there on the website. And we ship next day if we have it in stock. And we have everything right now except the Encyclopedia because it's still with the printer.
Okay, in addition to the stuff I do with Squared Circle, and Kevin, when I get done, you should plug some of your Inverse stuff. But in addition to the stuff I do with Squared Circle, I've done a lot of work with Antarctic Press. You can find a lot of my books on their sites or in comic book stores around the world. Rochelle the Teen Cockroach, horror comics, exciting comics. I do some work with Heavy Metal Magazine, so you can find me. I think my last one was in issue 297. Hopefully we'll have some more coming up here pretty soon. So across the board on those, I've got something coming out from Caliber Comics here in a couple of months. I've got a book. I mentioned the book for the Bushwhackers. My guess on that is that book's going to come out sometime in 2021. For fans who are fans of wrestling books, you might recognize the name Kenny Casanova. Kenny did Brutus Beefcake's book, Kamala's book, Vader's book. Well, he's the one publishing the Bushwhacker book for me. With Kevin, we've got some more books coming out, more wrestling books, new wrestling books. We've got after the Encyclopedia, after we get that to people who pre-purchased, we've got Killer Bees #3 coming out. We've got a book, as I mentioned, for Jeannie Hollywood coming out, the next issue of Bruno's. We've got the next issue of Bobby Fulton's. We've got a lot of stuff.
Gangrel in September. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, Gangrel for the Vampire Warrior Gangrel. So we've got a lot of stuff coming out the pipe over the next few months.
And let's just look at this. This is going to blow up. When would we expect Volume 2? I know it's taken 4 years. Sorry, little dig. 4 years to get Volume 1 going, but I'm sure you have some stories already set up for Volume 2, right?
We do. We have about half the content for Volume 2 already banked, including Killer Bees 3 and Gangrel. And then we will finish the rest of them in probably the ensuing 9 to 12 months. And so I think we're looking at Volume 2 in probably in early 22. That would be my best guess. Maybe sooner, but that's my best guess based on the schedule I've got now. And so we want to put 10 stories in each volume. So we've got a really meaty, beefy set of stories that we can pull Encyclopedia entries from for new wrestlers that we haven't featured before, and make this second volume just as good as the first one.
And then overall, what is your goal with these? I know we kind of touched on it, but John said you want to get it out to everyone. But is it to blow up Amazon? Is it to? I mean, where are these going to be sold after the pre-order's gone as well?
Anywhere that you would normally buy comic books. We've got some going into certain comic shops, but it will be on Amazon. I've got it set up there already. I'm just waiting for the books to come into hand. You can't do pre-orders on Amazon.
Right.
It'll be available there. It'll be available through our store. It's available digitally through Comixology, the largest digital comics platform on earth already. Well, it's approved by them. It's not available yet. I think in about 2 weeks we're going to have it up there. So it's rolling out gradually as we get it into all these publishing platforms.
And of course, if you can catch either of us at a convention, we have them, which is always kind of cool, to talk to fans and hand over the book, as well as the wrestlers. I mean, Hacksaw carries the books with him. Brian Blair, Jim Brunzell, whenever they do shows, Lanny Poffo, they've all got their individual books with them. So I'd encourage you to meet up with them and ask them. I know Bobby Fulton was just selling his book online just about a week or so ago and had some really good sales. So I always would encourage you to buy them from the wrestlers, get an autographed copy, and any little bit always helps. These guys haven't been in the ring, some of them for quite a long time. So support your wrestlers too.
Yeah, that's great. Support wrestlers across the board right now, as some of them haven't wrestled in 5 months now, the indie stars. All right, guys, thank you for joining me tonight. But one more thing. We always ask this, and I got to know. I really do. It's a wrestling podcast. What's you guys' dream match? One at a time, who do you want to see in the ring together, or have you seen your dream match already?
Go ahead, John.
For me, well, I mean, I was a huge Terry Funk fan, so I'd have to take Terry Funk and God. I mean, a lot of my old school stuff has already happened. I mean, Terry Funk and Harley Race was a great match. I remember Terry Funk and that egg-sucking dog, Dusty Rhodes, So, it's hard for me to pick another dream match because so many of them have already happened. But I'd love to see those again. I'd love to see. I mean, I wish Dusty were still here. I wish Bruno were still here. I'd love, if I could have a dream, it'd be to have some of those guys back and just see some of those matches live again.
Yeah, for me, I could pick a million different matches, but I like those wrestlers with that dark attitude, the mic skills. So I would love to see a Jake Roberts in his prime versus a Bray Wyatt.
Yes.
Those two guys, a feud for about 6 or 9 months. The promos would be unbelievable between those two guys, and not to mention the matches, but it would just be so much fun to hear them talking and tearing each other down time after time. I would love to see that.
Which is honestly, that's a cool call too, because if anybody reminds me of the modern wrestlers of that old school feel,
Bray,
it's Blackjack's son, Bray Wyatt. You know, I mean, he really he comes to the ring. He's got that old school look. He's got that old school swagger. And I have to agree with Kevin. That'd be a hell of a matchup.
And finally, one more thing. Are you guys going to be anywhere? You guys going to be at any cons? I know we've said the COVID's got everything shut down, but you guys have anything on your docket that you can say, hey, I'm going to be here, here, here?
Yeah, there are a few things actually coming up. This weekend, I'll be part of a virtual con, Infinity Con, that was scheduled for Tallahassee last month and got shut down because of the virus, but they're doing a virtual con. If you go to Facebook and look up Infinity Con Goes Virtual, you can participate in that event no matter where in the world you are. We're doing a couple of how to make indie comics panels. We're doing a horror comic panel, and all of our books will be available for sale while we're doing those panels online. Also, July 12th and 13th, we are going to an actual real convention, in-person convention in Huntsville, Alabama, the Huntsville Comic and Pop Culture Expo. It's always a great show. I think, who are they going to have up there? They're going to have Sergeant Slaughter is going to be in attendance there, Kevin Nash, and then they announced Lex Luger a few days ago. So our group, Rando Dixon and Amanda, are doing a piece for Kevin Nash, con exclusive print for Kevin Nash to sign for anybody that comes to his table. So it's going to be a great show, always well attended show. And of course, they're taking safety precautions, so it should be a nice, safe show. But we're looking forward to getting back out there and talking to people again. And we will have the encyclopedia in hand by that date for anybody that can get there.
I'll be taking a break for a little while. A lot of my shows got canceled, and I'm kind of using now as an opportunity to catch up on my writing for the Bushwhackers. But I do have a couple scheduled, unless they're canceled. I know they're both in review. One being Infinity Con in Orlando, actually in Kissimmee, where I'm scheduled to appear with the Gun Club, Billy Gunn and his son. And so we're supposed to be there. That's like mid-August. And then come January, I'm pretty sure this one will happen, but I'll be in DeLand, Florida. It's a small town. We'll be out at the fairgrounds. I'll be appearing there with Bugsy McGraw. And, again, I'll have all the books with me at both of those shows so long as those shows happen. Otherwise, you can find me on Facebook. You know, unless you're extremely creepy, I'll accept just about anybody who sends me a friend request. So you can find me on there and, you know, reach out. I mean, anybody wants to chat, I do chat with people, and people have gotten books from me even online. It's just I like to interact with people. I like to talk wrestling, and hopefully I'll hear from some.
All right, guys, thanks for stopping by tonight, and I hope this is the beginning of a great relationship. We can talk about Volume 2 real soon.
Absolutely.
Those were some of the coolest cats that I got to talk to. We actually did a Skype interview, and man, they're super personable. I truly mean when I said that I hope this is something that we can work together with. You know, if I'm a voice for them, that's awesome. They called us the ringside commentators. How the hell about that? But the big news is we're in the comic book encyclopedia of pro wrestling. The only podcast in the comic book encyclopedia of pro wrestling is freaking Can Crushers. That's awesome. I will support these guys. There's so much that I want to do with these guys going forward. It's awesome. What they're going to do with these encyclopedias is going to blow our minds. Go to WrestlingComics.com and order everything for these guys. Really, just buy the hell out of all their comics. They have a lot of wrestling comics, they do, but they have so many other ones. You heard Kevin and John both talk about. Man, I cannot wait. My copy's hopefully in the mail. I wish that mule that I talked about, or the oxen that John brought up, is going to be barreling through this door pretty soon. So I'm pumped. I really am. Guys, go out, pre-order this now, as you can still get it, or if you want to wait for a little bit until I say, hey, mine's in hand, that means they're going to be on Amazon and so on and so forth, that you guys will be able to buy them. John Crowther and Kevin LaPorte, two great guys. They really are. So support Comic Book Encyclopedia of Pro Wrestling. If for no other reason, you'll get to see a picture of myself and the English professor and our story. Yeah, you remember that picture we shared about a couple weeks ago? Yep, it's in there. That's what it is. I'm super, super stoked. Kevin and John, thanks again for joining Can Crushers, and we'll talk to you guys real soon. But remember, just because you're trash doesn't mean you can't do great things. It's called a garbage can, not a garbage cannot.